Welcome to the Career Compass, Series 2, Episode 3. It's my great pleasure to be joined today by Sean Farrington, a veteran in both senses of the word, with 30 years of international experience in the software industry, coupled with an ex-military background. Sean, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Aaron. I think I've been called a veteran for long enough that I'm comfortable with it in both senses now. But it took a while to get used to it in that regard. I've even got my veterans ID card through actually, so I'm proud holder
Fantastic.
of that. So there we
Well, they do say that grey dignifies, so take it as a compliment by all means.
go. Yes, yeah.
But great to have you here. At the time of recording, we're halfway through March 2024. How's the year unfolding for you personally and in terms of business?
Yeah, it's been really good actually. Sort of personally, I'm in that kind of empty nester phase. So we've got three grown-up children, but they've all flown the nest, but they keep fluttering back every once in a while. So I think we're
Yes.
away from being true empty nesters, but that gives you more flexibility and things. And I've started my own company in the middle of last year to really take my experience of the last 30 some in technology and also
Hmm.
my military career, and sort of operating more in an advisory role, so advising growing and startup businesses to hopefully benefit from my experience and also benefit from my knowledge of what to avoid as much as to what to actually do. So yeah, it's been a good start to the year in that regard. And from a business perspective, it's an interesting. I think we're slowly pulling out of
Mm.
this cut the dip. I think we've been plateauing since November last year. Is that people I speak to keep saying, "Oh yeah, we're plateauing. We're at the plateau. We're at the bottom." And I think we genuinely are now starting to pull up and out. There's a lot more activity in the private equity world, which I think is a great indicator that confidence is coming back, and obviously with that comes opportunity and new businesses and new ideas, and that helps promote growth. So yeah, it's looking good. Green shoots. I just wish
Yeah,
the weather would
absolutely.
reflect it.
Well, I'm with you on that. It's pretty depressing. I even got away last weekend for a short trip to Istanbul with my wife, thinking, well, yeah, surely looking at the latitude, it must be warmer down there, right? And it was about 10 degrees, cloudy every day. You think, well, the day we were coming back, of course, it was about 20 degrees blue skies. So it's part of the kind of fun.
Yeah,
But I think we're nearly there, and the weather should start turning quite soon here in the
yeah,
UK.
yeah.
I think in terms of your outlook, I'd probably agree on the whole. There's lots of discussions around bell curves and interest rate cuts and inflation, all the rest of it. I think, as you say, a good barometer of confidence is what are the VCs doing? Is there
Mm,
much M&A activity? And that trickles down into general recruitment, numbers of vacancies. It feels to me like probably the longest slump I can remember, because generally in these situations with, traditional recessions, there's a period where things start getting brighter, the flowers come out, the green shoots appear, and you're generally on the way back up from the bottom of the bell curve. Whereas at the moment there's a lot of false starts and false dawns. But I think there's probably more to it. I think the sheer innovation and pace of change with AI, for example, is
mm,
particularly in the world we're in,
yeah.
technology just kind of complicating the picture somewhat. But it's a hugely exciting time on the flip side.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I would agree with all that you've said. I think that, and it feels to me like it's a perfect storm
Mm.
of factors that have prolonged this kind of dip or slump.
Yeah.
Up to and including, quite frankly, the environmental ones of just literally, confidence and sort of excitement and motivation can be sort of dampened somewhat when every day is a grey day and it's raining a bit, which is certainly. I mean, I've got used to it living in Wales and southwest Wales,
Yeah.
southeast Wales in Monmouthshire,
Traditionally.
but
Yeah.
this year it's
Yeah.
really has gone on a little bit longer than anyone would have liked or hoped. But yeah, and I agree. I think, and for example, I think AI, whilst a great sort of opportunity, I think it's creating some reticence as well because I think people are kind of like once bitten, twice shy about new technologies and
Mm.
how to adopt and adapt to them. So yeah, it's an interesting time for sure.
It is, and I noticed with your background, you're in a gymnasium, a home gym, so clearly a healthy, fit guy, picture of health. And looking back, of course, you served in the British Army for 13
Mm.
years before transitioning into a highly successful sales career. Yeah, I've always held the view, from a recruitment perspective, that ex-military folks they do have a propensity to be more disciplined, more organised, arguably more focused than the average Joe. Question for you: how much of your early career in the army instilled those principles, and how did you ultimately carry those qualities across to a career in IT?
Yeah, it's a great question because I suppose I've become more aware, really, of what my my military trimester. I always talk about my career as trimesters. So the first trimester was my
Yeah,
military career. Second trimester was, if you like, learning the skills of selling in high tech, and then my third trimester was, if you like, combining the two elements of leadership and sales in high tech, and then leading high tech businesses through growth phases. And it's only in this third trimester that I've really had the opportunity to look back and really sort of connect with what my military phase actually gave me in terms of learning and understanding the principles of leadership. I think also learning that it's just about, for me personally, and of course I'll say personally, it's about adapting. So I could have, my military career was centered slightly technology focused from a unusual perspective really as an officer. I was in logistics, so I got formal training as an officer on a long course around ammunition, guided munitions. There's also the bomb disposal element of that. I was then fortunate enough to go flying, and so I had a very technical bent. I've always enjoyed technology from a very young age, even though it wasn't very sophisticated when I was young. It was color televisions was the sophistication, and video recorders. But that drew me towards technology. But then when you combine it with all the other things that I learned about creating teams, leading teams, of whom you may not be the brightest person in the room, and in fact, oftentimes you were not the smartest person. You were the leader, but you were not the most technically adept. That sort of really imbued a sense of learning how to lead without necessarily being the expert,
subject
but
matter expert. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And there's one example of what it gave me, and that, but comes back down to adaptability, I think, and teamwork were the two things that I really learned a lot about, and I've hopefully brought into my later career.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. I mean, the results kind of speak for themselves, but as you say, one of the key kind of principles is surrounding yourself with good people. I'm not sure if it was Steve Jobs, but it was someone in that kind of time and stature that said something like the way to grow your business and improve constantly is to hire people that are cleverer or more able than yourself, because you'll
Yeah,
ultimately be pushed up by them and you'll learn from them. And provided you can kind of orchestrate and conduct those assembled forces and harness their abilities in the right direction, you can achieve great things for sure.
absolutely. And I think the other thing, and it is a very good point. I think there's this kind of often quoted phrase, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, which is certainly true in my case. And also surround yourself with good people are really important elements. But I think the other element which I've come to appreciate more as time has progressed is, I think there's a great temptation, and I'd love your perspective on this, Aaron, of recruiting people in your own image, and you need some of that because, of course, you need succession, and you want a sense of, you want a cultural fit, etc. But be wary of it as well. And there is a great strength in recruiting the person who may grate a little bit with you when you're interviewing them, but you appreciate their skills, but you think, well, I'm not sure I want to go down the pub with this person. It's like, well, yeah, then hire them because they're going to bring something different. And it doesn't have to center around the pub, but that kind of sense where I can respect your skills, but we're not a perfect kind of key into each other is for me is an indicator that they're not exactly a clone of yourself, which is not necessarily a good thing. Diversity is a great sort of
Right.
team enhancer.
Exactly. And I think, rubbing along with those people, but obviously having clear differences. I think out of that kind of discomfort comes growth. Not to sound cliche,
Yeah.
but it kind of does, because you're seeing their playbook, their approach, their philosophy, and you say, okay, may not want to go for a beer with that person necessarily, whatever, or coffee, but you might kind of think, well, that's an interesting angle, or that's a really key approach that they've taken there. I wouldn't have got to that same conclusion the
Mm.
same way. So I think there's definitely a kind of a sense in bringing people in that aren't like yourself, that have different ways and a different kind of Swiss Army knife to bring to the table. I know
Yeah.
that the topic I planned for today's episode is what we would call leveraging forces veteran talent in the
Mm.
workplace. So ex-military folks going on to Civvy Street, how do we kind of best assist those folks? So this is a subject clearly that's close to your heart. Um, could you maybe give us a kind of a précis about why you feel passionate about this area, and what's the kind of current outlook for veterans now that are maybe coming out of the service, they're adjusting to Civvy Street, as you call it?
Mm.
What's your kind of viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things in there. Right from the get-go, I'd say that as a veteran myself, one of the things I struggled with was how to translate the skills and knowledge that I'd acquired in the military into a form that a prospective employer who may know nothing about the forces could understand. And I struggled with that for quite a while. And I was actually helped into my first role by somebody who had experience of the forces. So that was, they knew where I was coming from. They weren't in the same service as I was, but they knew, they had a sense of who I was and what I was about.
Mm.
And I think that diversity of experience, that ability to quickly form, storm, and norm teams in multiple different environments, that is that adaptability, I've mentioned it earlier, but also resilience as well, and an ability to take on new skills quickly, are all things that I would ask prospective employers to recognise when they have a veteran in front of them, that they may not have a like for like fit in terms of this particular skill set you're looking for, but by golly, they'll pick it up very quickly. And if you feel you have the opportunity,
resilience.
yeah,
Yeah.
and if you have the opportunity to invest some time and grow some people, then veterans are a really rich source of skilling. So it's not just, of course, there are trades in the military that map directly across into their sort of civilian equivalent. I mean, the simplest one, there are lots of military drivers, drive a truck, etc.
Yeah.
But then, especially in software and technology, I think there are fits. The military's got cyber skills and electronic engineering skills and software development skills inside there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Lots of that in there. But right at the base is a person is sat in front of you who is open to learning new skills and has already proven that they can learn new skills. And that's where I would maybe, if you want to sort of confirm it when you're interviewing a veteran, and say, tell me a little bit about a new skill that the military gave you, to really dig into their ability to learn and adapt something new, so that your investment is going to pay off. That's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, veteran is a bit of a double-edged sword, because to the point you made, I'm a veteran in two senses. Veteran, and most people think of the first sense, which is age related. But let's not forget, a lot of our military veterans have come out, have gained a huge amount of experience in a very short space of time, 10 years or less, which means they could be 28 years old or even younger and still have a huge amount of experience and a lot of maturity in their outlook, which is golden when you're trying to build and develop a business, for example, where you want to bring on new talent and for them to grow and evolve as you grow and develop your business. And again, I'd say that veterans veterans in that sense are also a great source of talent. So yeah, a lot
Absolutely.
to look into.
Well, I recall a recent example of this, actually, when I flew back into Manchester Airport in the UK which already has a somewhat kind of sullied reputation for efficiency and inexperience, all the rest of it. But that's beside the point.
Yeah.
We were kind of arriving back at a time when the border force folks were on strike. So what
Right.
they did was they brought in, a deployment of soldiers, or I don't think they were Marines, but they were kind of relatively young kind of soldiers coming in, staffing the desks, processing passports, and it was so quick and so efficient compared to the usual experience. Hope not offending anyone, but maybe listening from border force.
No.
It was I kind of got very quickly to the desk, spoke to the young guy, very, very polite, and all the military fatigue. And I just said, look, can I just say thank you? I found the experience so efficient, absolute pleasure. You're polite. You guys are just pushing us through. No problem at all. And I said, it's such a night and day experience from my perspective.
Mm.
And they said, well, it's in a quiet voice. I have to be careful because the guy standing behind me it's my boss. He actually works for Border Patrol. Terribly sorry, so please don't march me off to a cell, But it was the fact that it was that adaptability. They could bring these
Mm.
guys in, they could learn the systems, the process, just like that. So efficient, and they were deployed elsewhere probably within a few days, and to quite a lot of disappointment, I would gather, comparing notes and reading reports. So yeah, and I
Yeah.
think the second point is resilience. You transfer that to sales, which kind of leads me on to my next question. If we look at leadership attributes,
Mm.
your military experience obviously would have influenced your leadership style as you went into kind of
Yeah.
leadership positions within the software industry. So are there any specific lessons that you gained from your time in the army that kind of transferred across, if you like, to become effective leadership qualities?
Yeah. I think a couple I can think of. I think the first one though is actually and I think it's hugely valuable for me personally. Was I've witnessed the true impact of leadership. And how I witnessed it was that I was part of a unit that was one of the top performing units it was the top performing unit in our regiment. It was really well thought of across the corps. This is when I was flying. Um, and and then the leader changed. And that was all that checked, literally. I mean, there are people who get posted in and out of units all the time, but the key change, because if you like, senior management team of the unit was pretty sort of consistent. The only factor that changed was the senior leader, the officer commander, squadron commander, and the performance of the squadron didn't fall off a cliff, but it declined noticeably. That we were no longer number one. That we were no longer, sort of first among equals, if you will. We'd slipped ever so slightly, and nothing else had changed ostensibly. So I genuinely believe in the power of leadership, that the impact that good leadership can have, or reverse, the impact that poor leadership can have as well on an organization. And it's something that I've always brought with me in terms of when I've taken over teams. I'm not a kind of slash and burn leader. That's not my style. I've come across people who come in and the first thing they go is they kind of pull, oh my goodness, everything is just awful. We're going to have to completely clean this business out and refresh the whole thing. And I'm like, really? That for me is, frankly, personal opinion, is a sign of lazy leadership. It's like, I tell you what, look at who you have and assess them. Take the time, genuinely, whether they have what it takes, the wherewithal, the skill and the will to get to where you want to get them to, and then start working with those people and accepting there will be people who may not have the skill. You can teach a skill, but if they lack the will, they don't want to go on the journey. You will have to change them out. But generally, it's not a kind of change everybody kind of thing. It's about that. It's a leadership challenge more than anything else. And I think the second thing is what military people are very good at is planning. And there are standard procedures, and there's a discipline, and there's a consistency. But what they also recognise is a plan does not survive crossing the start line. In other words, that you can plan all you like, but when you start executing, things are going to change, and you have to adapt. And so it comes back to that adaptability thing. But thinking on your feet, reacting to what you see in front of you is a really key attribute to military thinking and to the skills that military people bring to civilian life. That ability to adapt and to assess and refine a plan and not be hidebound by what the plan says, but to go off the plan when the circumstances merit it.
And as an extension of that, then if we think about the ways to integrate talent, from an ex-military background, in your experience, what kind of strategies can companies implement to better integrate and leverage ex-military talent within the teams? Is there a kind of a playbook that you've observed that you felt that's effective, that works?
Yeah, it's that is an interesting question. I think the two things for me is some kind of structured onboarding, some kind of induction is important. And I find it interesting, actually, as an aside, a sort of a competitor podcast to yours, The Rest is Politics. Rory Stewart is banging on at the moment about ministers needing a proper handover, that they don't have a handover. And that comes from his military experiences. He knows what the military look at handover, takeover, and some form of induction and orientation as important. Not because you're telling them everything, but you're just orientating the individual to the circumstances and the environment in which they are operating. And I think that is really important. Military people hopefully have the flexibility and the understanding to recognize they're moving from a structure, very kind of structured and familiar environment in the military into civilian life. And into a civilian job, but inside the civilian job, they need to really just understand what are the boundaries. And so some formal induction or onboarding, some kind of buddy or a mentor is a useful thing, whether be that person ex-military themselves or not. I don't think there's necessarily, it doesn't need to be an ex-military person, but having somebody to buddy with who you can then kind of confide with, I think is important. And then the third thing would be checking in and recognizing you do have somebody who is, especially if they were in the military and this is their first job coming out, is checking in with them and just, how's it going? What are you finding? What's unexpected to you? How does it relate to your prior experience? And really just acknowledging that they are coming from a slightly different operating environment into a new one. So, maybe some of that is what you should be doing, good practice for any new employee, but I think particularly for somebody who's coming out of the military. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think so. I guess the mindset is thriving in structure or a structured environment. I guess that's a big part of it. I remember a few years back, there was a gentleman that set up a recruitment agency purely to find roles for ex-military folks. I forget the exact name. I think it was quite an innovative and groundbreaking move at the time. And I recall hearing an interview with him on the radio, the founder of this business, and he kind of said, one of the reasons I wanted to set this up is because, as well as being ex-military himself, he talked about all the misconceptions that exist that around ex-military folks. How do you kind of go about addressing those misconceptions? Would you have a message for those people that are a little bit maybe cynical, or they have a
I think the biggest one I've come across is this notion that soldiers, because I was in the army, I'll call them soldiers, but military personnel in general, at the end of the day, they've got to do what you tell them to do because you're ordering them, and you can jail them. And I'm like, well, yes, but that is literally, that's true. I cannot argue with that. That is absolutely true. But that is literally the weapon or the tool of last resort. And if you're having to resort to that tool at any time, you have singularly failed as a leader. And it's not what military people expect. It's one of those contradictions, but military people are used to good leadership. They are used to experiencing good leadership. They're used to being given responsibility. They're used to being imbued with a lot of trust. If you like, trust is a given. Confidence in their abilities is a given. And so anything that undermines that in their minds is a negative. And I think people who think that soldiers are TikTok, you've got to tell them everything is it's totally the opposite. What they prefer is here is the objective. Go figure out how you achieve the objective. If you need anything, come and ask me. But get on, and then the expectation, they will just want to get on with it. They will appreciate being left to get on with it, but they don't need to be told every single step of the way is the first thing. And I think the second thing is they're not. Whilst there are ground rules in the military. There are sets of standards and minimum skill levels, etc. They are just that. They are a foundation. They are not the reliance. And I think that really sets the British military apart from a lot of other militaries, where there is literally a book and a set of standard operating procedures that are followed to the letter for virtually every single task that they do. That's not the case in the British military. We are more flexible and we're more trusting of our soldiers. And I would say that's something that, if you recognise that, will help you as an employer get the best out of your veterans, if you will.
So you're effectively encouraging independent thought to a degree.
Yeah.
It's not kind of free reign. There's room for consideration and contemplation, if you want to call it that. Putting it a boot on the other foot, if you like, if we think about the advice you might give to veterans that are looking to transition into, let's say, the software industry, or maybe the civilian workforce in general, what would be your kind of pointers or useful advice that you might give to someone, say, the position you were in, 20 years back?
I think the first thing would be reach out and try and find. There are a lot of veterans everywhere, and they're not always necessarily apparent. But if you can find people who've been through what you're about to go through, I think that would be helpful, because you can benefit from their advice. That's a pretty obvious thing, I suppose. But I think the second thing is think outside the box. Don't put yourself in a box in terms of, oh, I was in the signals in the British Army, therefore I need to look at BT. It's like, no, I've worked alongside a lot of signals people who, it's a great transition in height appreciation and understanding of technology, of working and operating in teams, is equally applicable in any high-tech company. And it's more the appreciation and the understanding of what technology is capable of can translate into great careers in adjacent kind of industries or companies. So I think really trying to think laterally about where there are adjacent kind of businesses that appeal to you would be the first thing. And I think, and actually just extending that is, it's better to work for a company that you can be excited about and appeals to you than a company where you feel you would fit because of your skills. Oftentimes they do marry up, and that's great. But if think of leaving the military as an opportunity to completely reinvent yourself, to do the 1, 2, 3 things you always wished you could have done in the military, but never had the opportunity to do so, because you are the raw material that most businesses are looking for, which is somebody who is motivated, engaged, energetic, enthusiastic, and a quick learner. And all of those things are far more important than actually what's on your CV. So have the confidence to reach out to those areas or those businesses that maybe initially you wouldn't have thought would take somebody with your particular background in the military. You may well be very surprised.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, the people that we've dealt with over the years that have a military background have by and large been hugely impressive, very adaptable, very organised, very disciplined, very structured, very resilient. All of the things we've discussed today. So that's kind of advice, I guess, for the individual. If you were going to give advice to a company on their hiring strategy and what to look for, how to support veterans, how to integrate them into the workforce, what kind of things would you advise on from that perspective?
Well, I think, I suppose there are a couple of ways I think about it. One is, if you like, the opportunistic employer who has a series of candidates, of which one happens to be a veteran. And I think we've spoken about integration of that as an individual. I think the other interesting area that I've seen a little bit more of, but I think there is a great opportunity to do even more of it, which is to proactively reach out to veterans as the first port of call. I'm setting up a business. I want to quickly establish myself and proactively just reach out into the military ecosystem for a cohort of veterans, not just a sort of one or two opportunistic hires, but actually go after, proactively say, look, I want to hire 5 ex-military people. And don't forget, the military is, it's not just the Army, it's the Air Force. You've got the Royal Navy and Royal Marines as well. So there's a lot to go after in that regard, and maybe think about how your business could really take advantage of a cohort of individuals who know how to form quickly into a team. So if that's a key element of your business going forward, why not create it from proactively reaching out into the military and seeking to pull all of the members out of that team? Because you could do it. You could get all levels of skill from privates and junior NCOs all the way through to sort of mid-level managers of senior NCOs up to and including officers as well. And you could draw a hugely capable team and form it very quickly just by focusing in on a military sort of background.
Well, it's a terrific education by anyone's standards, I think, taking someone from that background, because they've been through such a structured environment with training, with development, been faced with multiple challenging scenarios. So I think it's an ideal kind of cohort to tap into. So it's been a really fascinating conversation. I've had some insights I wouldn't have had previously. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on and speak with us about this topic, Sean.
And I've enjoyed it, and hopefully it will help some military out there get their step into their new career.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hoping it'll inspire some meaningful debates and discussions. If any of our viewers or listeners does have a question they'd like to pose to Sean or myself, you'll find our contact details in the episode description. So until the next time, I'll say thank you very much again, Sean. Appreciate everyone tuning in, and take care. Cheers.